And before I forget, our fish hungry?
Yes.
Has our fish eaten?
We did not feed the fish.
I'm just gonna ask every every morning, because otherwise, unless I have that habit, I will forget. You know, he likes hanging out in his dark room by himself. I can feel that. You know, relatable. Yeah. We're not gonna think about it as sad. We're gonna think about it as he's lucky. Okay. I saw you here at night one. I think
9:30.
Yeah, I accidentally think I joined your Spotify for like 5 seconds. Well, because I was turning on mine, right? I was like, do you want to connect? I'm like, to my headphones? Yes.
Listening to like, you know what music that has like no lyrics to it is just how music is just, yeah, that's cool.
Just remember, I think it's my Android phone. Oh, we got text out.
Texan? Perfect.
10:30 a.m. We're good.
Okay. So today in here, we're going to talk about our ornithischian dinosaurs, our other main. It's not too dark. Okay. So last time, just to review, we talked about the Saurischian dinosaurs. We were over here on this part of the tree, and we saw our main group of carnivorous dinosaurs, the theropods, that eventually are going to give us our avian dinosaurs splitting off from that group. And we saw a group of very large herbivores as our other Saurischians, the sauropods. So that was our Apatosaurus, Brontosaurus example. So now we're splitting out to the ornithischians, which we characterized originally as having a different structure to their hips. So we can recognize them quite well when we look at their bony structure, just by looking at that one bone. So pretty much all of our dinosaurs in this group are going to be herbivorous. Maybe occasionally some of them ate something other than a plant. Even some modern herbivores will occasionally scavenge and eat some meat if it's there and easy. But overall, the traits that we're going to see are going to be specialized for eating plants, processing plants, digesting plants, that kind of stuff. Yep. Including possibly those hip bones. So this is just selected out our ornithischian pelvis. So we know we can recognize it because it all looks like it's kind of running backwards a little bit. So we have a smaller, differently positioned ilium, that red bone at the top, and our pubis and our ischium are narrow. They don't usually connect across the center. And what this does changes the muscle attachments, because you do have muscles attaching to your hips. That's kind of the point. They help move your thighs, move your legs, kind of create that position. So that is going to potentially change in some of our ornithischian dinosaurs. But the other thing that we can see if we're looking at this structure of our sort of basic ornithischian is that this also kind of seems like it leaves more room for the belly, basically. So this has also been related to that specialization for herbivory in the ornithischians, leaving a lot more room for particularly like long-term processing of this plant matter. It takes more effort to digest plant matter, got more kind of room for that. So we don't see the same little like rocks in the stomach that we did in our sauropods, but we do see other characteristics that are helping them digest food made of plants. I'm making suggestions that some of the characteristics that we see here, including that shape of the hip might have made it possible for them to have a little better kind of like squatting position, which could be related to nesting characteristics. Sometimes they're thought of as being good nesters. But when we were talking about Oviraptor last time, right? Actually, all our dinosaurs were laying eggs, and we saw that there's kind of a bad rumor about our theropods there, right? So that they didn't have nests or didn't protect them, which we now know that they actually did. So questionable on this front, whether this really distinguishes them from our other groups. Yeah. So when we start out with our ornithischian dinosaurs, these are a little later in time than the line that we were tracing through to the Saurischians. So we saw that we did see some of those Saurischian dinosaurs kind of in the late Triassic. And look at that map. Our oldest ornithischian dinosaurs are in the early Jurassic. So we're moving into our next period, and we've undergone an extinction event. So we had at the end of the Triassic, again, lots and lots of things kind of wiped out, which is how our dinosaurs are taking over. So it's not necessarily a surprise that we now have this new group specializing and splitting off in the Jurassic. So this is our oldest ornithischian dinosaur, possibly an omnivore on a seasonal basis, but definitely seeing some of these specializations for herbivory. So here we see its fossil teeth here. It's pretty small, chicken-sized, bipedal. You can see that in this image, it actually looks a lot like the early dinosaurs we were talking about in our Saurischian group. Okay, so it looks kind of like the Eoraptor did, kind of generic, right? We got a tail, we got a head, it's walking around on two legs, looks like it could run decently fast. Not too much to say here, other than that it's got some characteristics in the jaw that lead us to believe it's at the base of this ornithischian tree. So when we're thinking about ornithischians and herbivory, we're thinking again a bit about chewing. So we looked at some pictures of stress patterns in teeth last time. Here is a different view of how chewing kind of works in our dinosaurs. So here we can see we've got a big theropod up at the top. So from our Saurischian dinosaurs, when we see carnivorous dinosaurs, we see adaptations for really slicing, right? We actually don't have to modify our basal form all that much, other than making these teeth kind of pointier and sharper dependent, right? So they have kind of a slicing pattern, and the jaw moves up and down with those teeth kind of shearing past each other, right? So like scissors is the kind of situation we have, because we're just trying to cut up meat into small enough pieces. But in order to process plant matter, you actually kind of have to chew it, right? We see herbivores chewing, we see cows out chewing, and we see horses out chewing. You chew food, not a surprise. So in our ornithischian dinosaurs, in addition to that change in the shape of the hip, we do see changes in our tooth patterns and some of the structures in the jaw. Okay. So in order to chew, your teeth kind of need to match up. So you know how you go to the dentist and they do like press your teeth together and then they kind of look at them? Yeah. What they're checking is your occlusion. That's the word for the teeth pressing against each other. Because if your teeth don't fit together right, you're going to have trouble as you process food kind of side to side, grinding it, chewing it, making it into a nice appealing slurry to swallow and start out your digestive process. Carnivores don't really have to do this because it's kind of easier to break down meat. That stuff is just kind of more bioavailable to you. So we got to chew and grind our plant matter. So we're going to see these teeth at the back of the jaw that are kind of specialized for grinding. So we can see this occlusion here. Rather than shearing past each other, we have grinding teeth kind of clamping down on food. Now, we did see some teeth specialized for herbivory in our sauropods last time, so it isn't exclusive to our ornithischian dinosaurs. And we see it in like us, in deer, and all sorts of animals, right? Like occlusion is a general characteristic of animals that eat plants. We are also going to see another type of tooth in our ornithischians, kind of supported by a different bone that really is special to ornithischians, at least within dinosaurs. So we're going to see, we have kind of like a gap between those chewing teeth at the back, so think like the molars, and the teeth at the front of the mouth. So these teeth at the front of the mouth, you don't like chew with your two front teeth, right? That actually even feels painful when I try a little bit. But what those two front teeth are good at is like nipping off little bits of vegetation, right? So if you think about biting into an apple, right? You bite off a chunk of it with your incisors, with your front teeth. If you're an animal, you might nip off nice, tasty new growth at the end of a branch in that same sort of way. So we have these nipping teeth at the front and these grinding teeth at the back. So chewing's happening at the back, biting off little pieces at the front. We actually see kind of a gap between these two types of teeth pretty often. So this is called a diastema. Anytime you see a diastema, it really does just mean a gap. So you could have a gap between your teeth and someone might refer to it as a diastema. But when we're thinking here in this ornithischian dentition, we're talking about this kind of space here that we can see quite clearly in a lot of these examples. So here's this special characteristic that we see in the skulls of ornithischians that's related to the different things it's doing with its teeth and with its diet. So at the front here, we basically have like say an extra bone. We have a new bone, a different bone that's separated out. So this is called the predentary bone. So your dentary is a chunk of bone behind it. You don't have one, but dinosaurs do have one. They have kind of more bones coming together to form their jaw and their skull. They have a different arrangement than we do see in humans. But they have this extra little bit at the front called the predentary. So in many groups of our ornithischian dinosaurs, including our Triceratops that I have down at the bottom, this is going to be supporting a keratin-covered beak. So they're going to grow a beak in that nipping zone, basically. So when we were looking at the finches and talking about adaptive radiation, and we saw that actually some of their beaks were also specialized for biting off little bits of plant matter. So that's kind of what the beak is doing here in our ornithischian dinosaurs as well. While we're talking about teeth and mouths and feeding, there's an argument about whether ornithischian dinosaurs had cheeks. I think the general side that's winning, the general consensus is that they did have cheeks, but people have been kind of going back and forth. So actually, no, both these people, they're kind of chill, but based on their social media, it looks like they're kind of fighting about ornithischian cheeks. The reason that we think ornithischians had cheeks is that they have this extra kind of like little ledge next to their teeth. So the teeth are like a little bit inset. So we have basically an attachment point where we could have had soft tissue attaching and creating this kind of fleshy structure. And we don't see that in all of our dinosaurs. This is a characteristic we see specifically within our ornithischians, which you may never have thought particularly much about cheeks, but not all animals have them. We do, we have cheeks. But if you're a carnivore, for example, you want to open up your mouth really wide, right? And having fleshy structures attaching your upper jaw to your lower jaw kind of prevents how wide you can open your mouth. So this is not actually present in all animals. But what cheeks are good at is keeping food in your mouth if you're chewing, right? So if you're just snapping and gulping, you don't really need to keep food in your mouth for that long. But if you're an herbivore or an omnivore and you're spending a bunch of time chewing and like manually processing food in your mouth, you don't want it like falling and dribbling out the sides, basically. So that's the idea about the function of teeth and the kind of evolutionary argument for why ornithischians would have had them, what that use would have been. And the piece of evidence we think for why we believe they would have had them is that we see that place on the jaw where they could have attached. So we often look at bones and fossils and look for rougher places or smoother places or dents where soft tissue structures could have attached, because soft tissue structures rarely fossilize. Occasionally we get them, we get really excited about them, but mostly we're just dealing with bones and usually broken bones, to be honest. Another fun fact, animals like don't really have lips unless we're talking about mammals. So we'll move into mammals in our next unit, but lips are kind of specialized for like suckling. So they're specialization basically for drinking milk, which is why we see them in mammals, but they're not just like a general characteristic you see out in animals. So next time you stare at something that's not an animal, stare at a fish, stare at a lizard, you're not actually seeing like a flexible lip that they can move. So here's just an example. If you have not spent time thinking about cheeks and looking at cheeks, like what the difference would be for a cheek versus not a cheek. A parrot does have a cheek here in the realistic image. And so that's more what we think would have been going on with our ornithischian dinosaurs. So here we have a ceratopsian below depicted with a cheek on here. But here's an image of what a parrot might look like without a cheek. Right? You see that split going much farther back, like it does in a dog, right? So you can see really we have most of the teeth exposed, can open that jaw really wide, bite things, grab things. But it looks pretty silly if you put it on a bird. And jury's out, jury's arguing, I don't know. But probably not what we saw in these herbivorous dinosaurs that are spending a lot of time chewing their food. So within our ornithischian dinosaurs, we have a couple more groups than we did when we were talking about our saurischians. We're going to see 4 groups overall. So the first one we'll talk about, since we're already talking about teeth, are the Heterodontosauridae. So we talked about heterodont dentition before when we were talking about Eoraptor, our first sort of most basal dinosaur that we've found. So that heterodont dentition, meaning different types of teeth in the mouth. So we're going to have a group that's named for that feature. And we're going to see the Thyreophora. These are the armor bearers. So they're going to be characterized by having specialized skins, basically acting as armor. Our Marginocephalia, Ceph is a Greek root for head. Margin just means like the edge of something. So margin heads. This is where we're going to see lots of frills and crests and things like that. And then we're going to have a group of dinosaurs called Ornithopoda, or the bird-foot-eat dinosaurs. Before we get there, I want to show you another silly picture of dinosaurs. So in the way back when, I don't have a date on this picture, let's say late 1700s, maybe 1800s, not sure exactly where we're into for this drawing in particular. But There's this guy, Gideon Algernon Mantell. He's an English lord, I believe. He's a doctor, so his day job was as an obstetrician. But he ended up being really obsessed with fossils, basically. So he spent an awful lot of time wandering around finding really old teeth. His wife was also doing this kind of on the coast side, finding all sorts of fossils. And one of the things that he found, right, was actually like a claw tip. But because we had so few examples back then of the bones of our different dinosaurs, so you can see that we've only drawn on this iguanodon the bones that he had, right? So he had some arm bones, some leg bones, and a couple vertebrae, and then that claw. It was interpreted as being a little horn on the front, and I think that's really cute. So he was imagining that this dinosaur looked basically like a lizard with a bony nose, which is not true, but he was doing his best. People made fun of him for being so obsessed with these things, but thanks to him, we know a lot more and have a lot more examples of dinosaur fossils than we would otherwise. So here we see our Heterodontosauridae. So they mean different tooth. So we can see those different teeth, right? So instead of having a beak at the front, they really do have those nipping teeth that I was mentioning. You can see those indents for cheeks along the jaw, right? So we can see those kind of inset teeth there. So this is this is one of the places we really see evidence for that. And these are, I think, kind of one of our first groups branching off of this tree. Debatable, right? But we can see that adaptation there. They also have like large canines in this group. And overall, they're kind of like turkey size. And this is another group that we think had feathers. So we have lots of filaments along these creatures, these ornithischian dinosaurs, even though they're not in the group that we believe led to birds. So we actually see feathers a lot more places in the dinosaur tree than you might expect. So I pulled out a phylogeny here from a paper depicting the skin, essentially, of different groups of dinosaurs. So we can see here that branch off from archosaurs in the mid-Triassic or so. We have our Crocodilomorpha branching off, so things that look like crocodiles, morph just means shape, so crocodile-shaped things. So they have scale. We've seen crocodiles, or at least we've seen pictures and videos of crocodiles. But in our branch leading towards our dinosaurs, including even, maybe I think this is supposed to be our pterosaurs, we start to see examples of filamentous fibers, basically, on species kind of throughout the tree, at least as it's currently interpreted, right? So we see some here in this pterosaur. Here we see some filamentous fibers in our ceratopsians. We don't see any in the sauropods, haven't found any there. So that was one of our group of, that was our herbivorous saurischian dinosaur. And then in the theropods, we see a fair number of examples with those filamentous fibers. And as we move within that group out towards our birds, we start to see things that look really, really like true feathers. So the classic example of our sort of proto-bird or leading to birds with feathers is the Archaeopteryx here. We can see true feathers really arising here within this group. Now, given this phylogeny and what you can see about the skin, what is a question you might ask looking at this? I'm trying to have you guess what I'm going to say next. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase that question. So we kind of have a couple options here if we're thinking about how feathers evolved, or at least how these filamentous fibers evolved, right? Like, if the tree works like this, and this is really where we see these distributions, right? Okay, so true feathers evolving as we're going towards birds, that's relatively clear. But one option is that they're all convergently evolving these filamentous fibers, but perhaps a more parsimonious interpretation would be that actually the ancestor to dinosaurs already had these filamentous fibers. So we already maybe had this change in the structure of the skin and in the genetics leading to our skin, right? In which case, if we take this tree and interpret our last common ancestor of dinosaurs as having these filaments that look a little bit like feathers and eventually lead us to feathers, then we might predict that overall, kind of like all of our dinosaurs might have had this, right? So we don't find them currently in the sauropods, but our explanation for that could be that they have like secondarily lost them rather than that we somehow separately had all of these groups over and over again, evolving these same structures, right? Now it could have happened, but like looking at how prevalent they are and how these groups aren't really related to each other, right? Like we don't have one separate branch with all our filamentous fibers on it. We could be wrong about this tree overall, right? That's an option, but kind of weird if we're seeing convergent evolution of this over and over again. But then again, mammals have fur, right? So it's helpful for thermoregulation to have structures on top of your body. So maybe yes, maybe no, right? So we can argue about whether we would have expected really all of our dinosaurs or our earliest dinosaurs to have had these fibers on them. But if we want to say that they did, then we have to ask why we haven't found more of them or why we've only found them so recently. So questions here. All right. So thinking more about the skin in our next group of ornithischians, we're going to see our armored dinosaurs. So it's worth defining and looking at this structure called a scute. So these are our scutes. So they're basically like those shells you see on turtles, right? Like, so we know it's not the shell. We know that the structure of the shell of the turtle, the bony base, is developed from the ribs, but we do have this protective outer layer made of scutes, which are bony plates or scales that get overlaid with keratin. So we basically have horn overlaid on top of another structure, either skin or extra little bitty bones. So in modern groups, we see this in crocodiles, in their skin. We see it in turtles overlaying their shell. So it's an additional layer over that carapace. And we see it in some bird feet as well, these scutes. Now, if the scute underneath of that horn, that keratin, is made of an actual piece of bone, this is when we call it an osteoderm, technically. So osteo refers to bones, derm, like dermatology, refers to skin, so literally like bony skin. So in our next group of dinosaurs, our armored dinosaurs, we're going to see lots of specializations in these osteoderms and in these bony structures protecting the outside of our dinosaurs. So I pulled up this comic so we can make it big. This is actually quite scientifically relevant. So this is a comic from 1982, which you can appreciate, depicting a caveman talking about the tail of this dinosaur looking at a structure called the Thagomizer, after Thagomin, who has died in this cartoon. And scientists actually liked it so much that now they really do call that structure a Thagomizer in scientific papers. It's just what it's called now, for real. Which is fun to me. I love examples of people not taking science too seriously, right? Having some fun with it.
They got it from the comic.
Yeah, it literally came from the comic. But it's professional now, so it's fun. They didn't have a word for it, right? They were just calling them tail spikes. So nice to have a new word. Yeah. So our armored dinosaurs are within the group Thyreophora, and we have two main examples, two main groups within it. We have our ankylosaurs and we have our stegosaurs. So stegosaurus is a Thyreophoran armored dinosaur within this ornithischian group. So we can see in the pictures here the differences and similarities between these two groups, both of which have developed protective structures on the skin, basically made of these bony scutes and osteoderms. Yep. So looking at these two and the description of the ankylosaurs and stegosaurs, which one's which? Yeah, yes. So the stegosaurus is the green one. The difference you can see between the two, they both have protective mechanisms on the outside, and they both have weird stuff on their tail, right? Big kind of protective tails that they could have swung around to ward off predators, really, because they're herbivores, right? They might have used them in fighting each other if they were territorial or something, but they're not hunting with these tails. But the structure of that tail is different. So in the ankylosaurs, we see a bunch of the scutes just like merging together into a big blob on the end, creating this bony tail club. And in our stegosaurus is where we see that Thagomizer, so made up of a bunch of spikes on the end. How exactly they use their scutes to protect their backs is also different. So our stegosaurus has bony plates upright, kind of on a ridge along its back. So big plates, making it harder to chomp down on, bite from the top. We do see these armored dinosaurs in environments with large predatory carnivorous dinosaurs. And in our ankylosaur, you can see that we've got some protection back here, but basically we're almost trying to kind of make a shell out of those scutes. So we've got lots of scutes kind of scattered along, just making that back, that tough hide, really hard to kind of bite through, basically. So both of them are doing similar functions, but in different ways. Our third group, I think we're up to, are our Marginocephalia. So our Marginocephalia, or our margin heads, are the group that includes our Triceratops. So our Marginocephalia, we only actually see in the northern hemisphere, so on these northern continents. So they're really restricted there. And we have moved a little later in time right now. We haven't been looking at the shifting of continents with each of these dinosaur groups. But by the time we're here into the Marginocephalia, looking at things like Triceratops, Pangea really has broken up. And that's part of what's creating the late Triassic extinction event. And we can see that our northern continents are separated strongly from our southern continents during this time period. But the northern continents are still kind of connected to each other. So breaking up a little bit, but there are ways to cross between them a little bit more easily. So our Marginocephalia are up in the north. In terms of their structure, what we're going to see is that the bones at the back of the skull are really expanded. They even, sometimes end up with extra bones around the back of the skull, and then those extra bones sometimes merge. They have even more expanded cheekbones. So you can see those expanded cheekbones out to the side here. So this isn't just referring to that fleshy chewing structure. Right now we actually have bone projecting out of the cheeks. And we see horns on the front. So we see they look kind of like rhinos, some of them. So within our Marginocephalia, most famous group are probably our ceratopsians, because Triceratops is very, very popular. So we see our Triceratops here, but that's not actually our only ceratopsian. So there are lots of other ceratopsians within this group that have kind of subtle differences. So they're all going to be quadrupedal. That's how we're interpreting them. So they've come down from that bipedal condition of our early dinosaurs and our early ornithischian dinosaurs. They're down on all fours, basically, because they're kind of heavy, kind of big. You see expansions in the chewing teeth. So those teeth at the back are going to be more numerous, larger, things like that. And here is a group in which we regularly see a beak. So we have a rostral bone here at the front, so in front of that predentary bone. So here in this sort of nipping area where we would pick off vegetation. And then we see those expanded skull bones and potentially some of the cheekbones merging together into this frill at the back. So this is our frill. So we can see that throughout our ceratopsians, right? We've got this big fan-like structure at the back of the head. I love this. This looks like the weirdest thing in the world to me, right? I didn't pull that one out for us, but crazy. So what do you think the function of this frill could be? What would you use this for?
Well, like sexual attraction, like really fun thing to name that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This one's especially. Yeah. So we have some guesses for what these are about. So yeah. So one is, I think sexual selection would kind of go with this species recognition one, right? That we have many different ceratopsians, right? They presumably want to mate with other ceratopsians within their own species, right? So we would expect to see sexual selection on this characteristic that helps them recognize other members of their same group. And we do see this in some modern groups of animals, so like antelope in Africa, right? All look kind of similar, right? We have a lot of them occurring in the same environments, but they do have different structures on their heads in these horn characteristics, which means if you were another antelope, you could see from farther away whether it's a member of your own group. You don't have to be close enough to maybe smell it or see it in detail or something like that. So that's an idea about why we see these differences in the head structures on our ceratopsians. And it would also be reflective of different genetic histories, right? Different evolutionary histories. So kind of both and on that one. And our other two theories about what we might have been using them for, why they're kind of useful potentially throughout the group would have been, so both defense and fighting do kind of go together, right? In terms of like battle, interacting with another animal. The difference being some of these hypotheses are about like defending yourself against predators. So kind of like those armored structures that we saw in our Thyreophora, or fighting each other, right? So like intra-species competition, right? So territoriality, fighting for mates, things like that. And we do see on some of our ceratopsian skulls that we find, some of these fossils, like marks, like injuries that look like they could have been caused by things like horns. Exactly how you tell whether an injury on a bone was caused by a horn or a tooth, not totally sure. probably partially about the shape, but there is some evidence right there on the head that something was going on at the front as well. It doesn't have to be one or the other, right? They could have been using them for all those purposes. I am pulling out another one of our ceratopsians, just because we talked about it already, actually, while we were talking about our Saurischian dinosaurs. So we saw one of our ceratopsians already, the Protoceratops, right? So it looks kind of little, kind of sheep size, but we can see that beak, we can see that frill. We don't really see horns here on our Protoceratops. And we were looking at it before in two contexts. So we talked about it as we were talking about Velociraptor, one of our theropod dinosaurs, right? So this is the other dinosaur caught fighting to the death in that fossil. In this image on top, the Protoceratops kind of looks like it's winning. Pretty sure the Velociraptor, well, I guess nobody won if they both died stuck together like this. But on the whole, we do think that the Velociraptors were hunting, successfully hunting, the Protoceratops herds, really. The other place we mention these Protoceratops is that these fossils are from the Gobi Desert, and our first Oviraptor fossils are from the same place, right? So that was where originally they thought those eggs from the Oviraptor belonged to the Protoceratops because of the vast numbers of Protoceratops fossils they were finding in this environment. So we clearly have some group behavior in our Protoceratops. But we now know that those eggs did belong to the Oviraptor, although presumably all of our dinosaurs are laying eggs. Which also lets them get so big, right? So they don't have to carry around a giant mammoth baby in their belly for God knows how long. So our Triceratops is just a member within this group. Specifically, if you're looking at a fossil, this is the one that's characterized by 3 horns. So we have 2 front curving horns here above the orbit, and then we have a horn here in front of the nose. So this would have been different in other ceratopsians, but they might trick you if you were looking at a fossil and not counting and thinking really closely about all that. So, our other member of this group that we're going to pull out as an example is the Pachycephalosaurus, the Pachycephalosaurs. So these groups within our Marginocephalia remain bipedal. So our ceratopsians come down onto all fours to carry their big heavy weights. The Pachycephalosaurs stay up on those hind legs, and they're characterized by having silly domed heads, right? So they also have an expanded bone at the back of the skull, but instead of going up and becoming a frill, it just becomes this large, hard, extra thick, rounded structure. You can also see some kind of spikes around the edges there. And one of the interpretations of this classically is watching them butt heads kind of against each other. So kind of that fighting for mates kind of idea here in the Pachycephalosaurs. Whether that's its only function, who knows, we weren't there. So our final group within our ornithischian dinosaurs are our Ornithopoda. So very similar name because ornithology just is a root that means bird. So now instead of being bird hipped, we have bird footed dinosaurs. So pod like podiatry is a foot. This is because they have 3 toes at the back. So we saw that in our theropods and saurischian dinosaurs, we also had 3 or fewer toes and claws. That was the group that we think leads into birds, but we see sort of convergent evolution here in our ornithopoda, reducing those numbers of digits down to 3. These have also been referred to as our duck-billed dinosaurs. So we see these elongated structures on the front, this duck-like bill. We have our other typical ornithischian characteristics also. So we still have a predentary bone. We have insect cheek teeth. They have lots and lots of teeth, like lots of replaceable teeth, so they can just keep chewing and chewing and chewing. Doesn't matter how they wear down, because they got more. We got that ornithischian hip illustrated, and then the specific ornithopod characteristic of those 3-toed feet. So if you got an ornithischian dinosaur, 3-toed feet, you got an ornithopod. So here's some examples of our ornithopod dinosaurs. So we got some hadrosaurs here. I don't remember which one I pulled for that. Okay, cool. So hadrosaurs are one of the members of this group. So we can see their kind of flat skulls. We don't have ornamentation really on our hadrosaurs, these long bodies, but these elongated kind of bill-like structures in the front. Also pulled out an example of something else that people can study when they're looking at fossils or dinosaurs. We're not always looking at normal animals, I guess, like things die for a reason, including fossils. So you can also look at forensic paleontology and basically like pathology in fossils. So there are examples, limited numbers, but like throughout our groups of animals that appear to have had various diseases, pathological conditions. So here's an example of a hadrosaur that looks like it had a tumor on its foot. And we have fossil dinosaur cancer here in this hadrosaur. So it would have injured its foot area and affected the area of those muscle insertions. So I think it probably would have been like limping around. You can also see field fractures, so possibly fighting here. You see all sorts of weird stuff in our fossil record. I want to talk for a second about dinosaur sounds, because a member of this group, the Parasaurolophus, is one of the places that we've had a fair amount of analysis of like dinosaur vocalizations, trying to figure out what sounds they would have made. So first, we're going to listen to our sound mixer from Jurassic Park talk about what he did when he was creating those dinosaur sounds.
To design our tissue to make things already collected as large a library of real animal sounds. Vision. Baby ostrich. It changed here, broadband, things like that. give it low frequency, this is more. Look at all the animals, except I have a friend, he just said he made this house, this house. He made this for whole, and it became the raptor. The baby elephant, got personality. Another way to kind of put them together. It's nice to do something that sticks around. As I was starting work on this, even before anything was shot, I realized it's going to be a good one. Steven Spielberg, that's selling, but great idea. This is very much a home. So it felt like I was being given to a candy store. Very, very, very
So, okay. I love all those dinosaur sounds, but it's cool to use real animals. But a lot of those animals have structures that we don't think dinosaurs had, or we don't know that they had, specifically like vocal cords. We don't know if dinosaurs had vocal cords. And in grad school, I heard a very different discussion of what I guess were those phone calls about the dinosaur calls. One of my professors in grad school, I pulled up a paper of his here, actually did do a fair amount of research on dinosaur sounds, although his impression, that guy in the video, of someone saying, I don't know, did sound a lot like Dave. So, questionable. He likes to tell a story at lunch about getting a call from the Jurassic Park people and having them pass by a bunch of dinosaur sounds and ask, like, could it have sounded like this? And he's like, oh, well, maybe, yes. No, that one needs to hiss, etc. He says they sent him a t-shirt. That's about it. So it's interesting to hear that guy in the interview say that they said they had no idea and had no answers. So now I really wonder what the phone call actually consisted of. So here's a copy of a tabloid from the World Weekly News that my professor hung up on his door and still has on his website because he was very proud that his dinosaur research made it into the tabloids, reporting that dinosaurs honk like a Buick. So that's his stuff. Well, that was a long time ago, as you can see. More recently, they have actually reconstructed from CT scans the resonating chambers of some of these dinosaurs, including the Parasaurolophus, which is what we're looking at here. Dave, my professor, had a giant PVC pipe where he had reconstructed, like kind of by hand at the hardware store, what the inside of the skull would have looked like, and then he would just like blow through it to see what sound it would have made. That was like how this research kind of worked, although there's like science and math behind it too, right? Like theories. But recently, not recently, but since then, the research has been replicated, not in the hardware store, but in digital form, reconstructing these things and kind of trying to replicate some of the noises that we think these dinosaurs could have made, because the interpretation of these hollow structures in the skull is that they were changing the sound that the dinosaur would have made. So that this is like basically acting kind of like a trombone, right? So puffing air through these hollow pipes in the skull. So for our Parasaurolophus sound, they to give us some new interpretations of at least this specific dinosaur's sound. So you can hear how it sounds kind of like eerie. and trombone, like brass instruments would be like that. And that's partially because we don't know if they had a voice box or a vocal cord. The soft tissue structure that we don't have to explore. I like it. Okay. All right. So this is the last slide, and we're really going to end here today, but a point of note for the next time. So we've been talking just about the dinosaurs, and this group that we've been talking about are ornithischian dinosaurs, are herbivorous, and we've been talking about characteristics that they've been developing for that herbivory, and therefore also some of their defensive capabilities, right? Because they would have been prey animals. So we see those armored characteristics in them as well. So in the early parts of the Mesozoic, so in the Triassic, and then in the earliest parts of the Jurassic, all those plants would have been like ginkgos, ferns. We talked about there being like club mosses. They've gotten smaller as we're moving into the Mesozoic, but we don't actually have like fruits or flowers until we get into the Jurassic. So this is going to be a new adaptation in our plant life, where we're really going to see an explosion in the plant world in terms of the diversity of the number of plants and a lot of the modern groups of plants that we have now. So this is evolving kind of around the same time as these herbivorous dinosaurs, right? So we have this kind of interesting match up of the evolution of a bunch of dinosaurs that are specialized for eating plants and plants themselves evolving new characteristics for spreading and protecting their seeds, I'm going to say. So we see this evolution of this new structure potentially kind of in response to, or at least alongside, these changes in herbivory, changes in number of herbivores, changes in types of herbivores. So the fruit is a very specific structure that comes from a flower. So a fruit is actually just a plant ovary gotten really big and fleshy. So fruits and flowers go together. If something has a flower, it has a fruit. If something has a fruit, it has a flower. So here we see tracing a typical tomato through how you get to a nice fleshy tomato. We have some fossil fruits as well, which is part of how we know where they're appearing in the fossil record, part of how we know what started eating them and when, and we can start to kind of stitch that together next time. Cool. That's what we got this year.